Welcome to the Executive and the Republic, where we bring the lives of America's early presidents to the forefront, one story at a time. Today, we're focusing on James Monroe, the fifth President of the United States. You might have heard of the famous Monroe Doctrine, but there's a lot more to his presidency and his legacy than just that. Let's dive into his story and see how he shaped the future of America. James Monroe came to the presidency during a time when the United States was beginning to find its footing on the world stage. Born in 1758 in Virginia, Monroe was a soldier, lawyer, and diplomat before he became the nation's leader. He had already served in the Revolutionary War, helped negotiate the Louisiana Purchase, and been a key figure in the early development of the country. But when he was elected president in 1816, America was still recovering from the effects of the War of 1812. There were divisions between the states, economic problems, and questions about how to expand the country. Monroe's presidency would come to be known as the era of good feelings, a time when political unity seemed possible and the nation's future looked bright. But, as we'll see, that unity was not as perfect as it might seem. Monroe's presidency began on a high note. He took a goodwill tour across the country, visiting northern and southern states alike, promoting a sense of national unity. The press dubbed this period the era of good feelings, largely because the bitter political divisions between the Federalists and Democratic Republicans seemed to be fading. Monroe was, in many ways, the last president of the revolutionary generation, a steady hand that reassured the young country. But behind this optimism, Monroe faced some serious challenges. One of the biggest issues was the question of slavery and how it would impact the future of the nation. In 1820, the debate over slavery reached a boiling point with the Missouri Compromise. At that time, the country was expanding westward, and new states were being added to the Union. The problem? The balance between free states, where slavery was illegal, and slave states, where it was allowed, was getting more complicated. When Missouri applied for statehood as a slave state, it sparked a fierce debate. Monroe worked with Congress to create a compromise. Under the Missouri Compromise, Missouri would be admitted as a slave state, but Maine, which had previously been part of Massachusetts, would be admitted as a free state. This kept the balance of power between free and slave states in the Senate. Additionally, the compromise drew a line across the rest of the Louisiana Territory, stating that slavery would not be allowed in states north of that line. The Missouri Compromise was a temporary solution, but it foreshadowed the growing divisions over slavery that would eventually lead to the Civil War. For Monroe, it was a delicate balancing act, one that kept the peace for now, but left many issues unresolved. While domestic politics were challenging, Monroe's presidency is perhaps best remembered for his contributions to foreign policy. In 1823, during his second term, Monroe made a bold statement that would define American foreign policy for generations to come. This was the famous Monroe Doctrine. So, what exactly was the Monroe Doctrine? It was a declaration to European powers that the Western Hemisphere, North and South America, was no longer open for colonization. Monroe's message was clear. The United States would oppose any European interference in the affairs of the newly independent countries of Latin America. In return, the U.S. would stay out of European wars and conflicts. This was a big deal. At the time, many of the countries in Latin America had just gained independence from European colonial powers, and there was a fear that Europe might try to re-establish control. Monroe's declaration was a way to assert America's influence in the region without getting involved in wars. It wasn't backed by military might at the time, but the Monroe Doctrine would later become a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. In many ways, the Monroe Doctrine marked the beginning of America's rise as a global power, even if it didn't fully realize it yet. It was a message to the world that the United States was here to stay, and that it would protect its interests in the Western Hemisphere. But Monroe's time in office wasn't just about high-stakes diplomacy and political compromise. He also helped solidify the country's identity. Under his leadership, the U.S. expanded its borders, and Monroe's administration worked to build infrastructure, roads, canals, and ports that connected the growing nation. This was a time of westward expansion, and Monroe helped lay the groundwork for America's manifest destiny, the belief that the country was destined to stretch from coast to coast. When Monroe left office in 1825, he was incredibly popular. In fact, he ran virtually unopposed for re-election in 1820, securing nearly every electoral vote, a testament to his wide appeal. But like all presidencies, Monroe's time in office wasn't perfect. The issue of slavery continued to simmer, and the nation's rapid expansion would eventually lead to deeper divisions. James Monroe may not be the most famous of America's early presidents, but his impact on the country is undeniable. From the Missouri Compromise to the Monroe Doctrine, his presidency helped shape the nation's direction both at home and abroad. As the last president of the founding generation, Monroe bridged the gap between the Revolutionary War era and the America that was beginning to find its place on the world stage. And that's the story of James Monroe, a president whose steady leadership helped guide the country through times of change and challenge. If you enjoyed this episode of The Executive and the Republic, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another dive into the lives of America's early presidents. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.